Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Working in Hockey podcast. I'm your host, Nick Bowins. Today, pleased to be joined by not only our special guest, who we'll get to in a second, but Lukas Georgas, our co-host. We finally made it. We're finally here. Lukas, I'll let you introduce our guest this week.
Obviously happy to be back. As Nick mentioned on past episodes, I'm kind of going to be coming on to help co-host in the future here. So super excited to get this going. We do have a very special guest today, Hilary Gorlin. We are super excited to talk to. She's held many amazing, super unique roles in sports. Most recently, Director of Communications for the CEO of the Boston Bruins, as well as previously Director of Corporate Communications for the Portland Trailblazers. So two super unique and interesting roles that I know for myself I am super excited to get to dive into and learn more about. And I'm sure Nick is the same. And yeah, we're super excited to welcome you on, Hilary.
Thank you, Lucas. What a nice introduction. Happy to be here.
Of course.
Well, glad to have you here, Hilary, and excited to dive into things like Lukas said there. So let's start with the Bruins, the most recent role that you had there, Director of Communications, Office of the CEO or the owner there for the Boston Bruins. As much as you can, tell us what that role is like. What does a Director of Communications do day to day?
Yeah, it's a great question and a bit of a complicated question depending on how much information you want. But so in my role specifically, you can almost look at it like a chief of staff kind of role. So I was basically kind of the eyes and ears for our CEO, whose family also owned the team and the building and the parent company as well. And so I would be in day-to-day meetings, taking notes on things that he needed to be informed about. I would make sure that he would have eyes on everything to make final decisions on big projects and things like that. I wrote all of his speeches and made sure that he had a lot of media opportunities to just kind of get in front of the local and national media, helped with crisis communications and things like that. So it was a really big job. I worked really closely with the sports side. We can go into this a little further, but I worked really closely with the sports side of communications, which is basically the guys that are over at the practice facility, doing media during practices and traveling with the team. So I was technically a part of that team, but I was over at TD Garden in the corporate offices and doing more business related things instead of hockey related things.
Very cool.
Awesome. And I guess kind of to piggyback off that answer, can you share for the listeners what some of the differences between like the hockey communication side of things and like the business communication side of things and how they kind of work like alongside each other?
Definitely. So every team is a little bit different. Every league is a little different, and every team within the leagues are a little bit different. But a lot of the teams have separate hockey communications and corporate/business communications departments. And the biggest difference is the hockey communications team, like I mentioned, it's going to be at every single practice. They're going to be on the road with the team. They're going to be doing pregame and postgame media, coaches' media availability. That sort of thing. And then the corporate communications side does basically everything off the ice. So, if a player goes to some sort of community event and you want to invite media that maybe isn't traditional sports media, that's going to be a corporate communications thing. Or you saw the Bruins, for example, would sign a new corporate partner, or there's some sort of big initiative going on off the ice. That's all going to go through the business communications side of things. So how I like to describe it succinctly is anything that is not on the ice hockey, even if it's still player related, will go through the business side.
And that's cool. That makes sense to kind of compare it that way. And you touched on kind of being a chief of staff of sorts there as well. That resonates with me. I was a chief of staff at my current company. Ultimately, we kind of said, hey, maybe this isn't for you. Let's do something else. But it's very much an all-encompassing sort of role, right? It sounds like you had kind of involvement, integration with a lot of different people there. I know the title says Office of the CEO or the owner there, but I assume you were working very interchangeably involved with all the different departments, all the different teams, and kind of juggling lots of different hats day to day?
Yeah, that's honestly my favorite thing about working in communications. I've worked in pro sports communications for almost 10 years now. And I think it's the department that touches the most other departments in the organization, honestly, internally and externally. But I don't think that there was a department I didn't work with, both in with the Bruins and with the Trailblazers. And that's super fun because you have your hands in every little piece of the business. And at the end of the day, you know, I'm a big sports person. I grew up playing hockey. I played hockey in college. I love it. And I love the sports side of things. But at the end of the day, these professional sports teams are also businesses to make money. And so much of what goes on day to day, there are so many more business staff than there are sports staff. And there's so many more people in kind of that business office than working, you know, with the team. The amount of people that actually have game night responsibilities, you know, for the Bruins, for example, for a staff of like, you know, 300-ish full-time people, you probably have 50-ish tops that actually have game night responsibilities. So it is kind of interesting that like there are a lot of different ways to work in sports. And I find that being in communications is the one that really touches the most different departments, both honestly, both on the corporate and the sports side.
And you just touched on like being someone who's super involved and loves sports. And as far as sports towns go, Boston has to be one of the best, if not the best, sports city in North America. So what was it like working for like an original six team who had such a great success those years and celebrated their centennial season and like in such a passionate sports market?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Lucas. And it was also it was interesting going from a sports city like Portland, Oregon, to a city like Boston, and we can get into that a little later, the Oregon stuff. But I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, Boston is such a sports city. I grew up in New Hampshire, so Boston was the closest city to me, and honestly, I'm a little afraid of Boston sports fans because they are so intense, and Bruins fans specifically. I mean, it was so cool to be a part of such an iconic franchise, and especially to be able to celebrate the centennial. And my first season there was when we broke the NHL record for most wins in a season, which was also just absolutely insane. Obviously, a bit heartbreaking come playoff time, but we don't have to talk about that. But the fans are so passionate, but not only that, they're actually really knowledgeable as well. I feel like a lot of Bruins fans have been Bruins fans for life, but and they bleed black and gold, but they also are just intelligent in hockey. Hockey's such a big sport in New England, and a lot of people, you know, play, have kids that play, all of that. But it is really cool to be a part of something that's like the heartbeat of the city, you know. And it was a little different in Portland, not to smack talk Portland, because Portland's an awesome sports city too. Obviously, there's no professional hockey team in Portland, but they do have the Portland Winterhawks of the Western Hockey League, who I worked for a little bit, and they have good fans too. But it's a different type of fandom. The Bruins are just next level, and it was cool to be a part of.
Yeah, no, Boston's as sports mad as it gets. So that's just seems like an awesome experience. And again, like Lucas said, the centennial season too, like the record setting season. So cool you got to experience that. But I want to segue a little bit to the Portland Trailblazers there. You touched on your experience there. You were there for over 6 years, working your way up the kind of communications ladder with them at a bird's eye level. How did it differentiate between the NHL and the NBA? What was similar? What was different working between the two there?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I think, you know, when I moved from Portland to Boston, I had a bit of culture shock. Even though I'm from New England, I'd never lived in Boston before, but I had a bit of culture shock, both moving from, you know, a very, very kind of like hippy dippy city to, you know, Boston, which is, you know, New Englanders are a little, I don't want to say aggressive because I'm a New Englander and that's mean, but it's a different vibe. And then going from the NBA and into the NHL was frankly almost like going into a time machine back in time a little bit, because the NHL, and again, no disrespect, I think the NHL is fantastic, and I loved working in the NHL, hope to work in the NHL again someday, but I do think that there are some things, especially when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making sure that everyone feels kind of seen in the hockey space. It's really behind the times in compared to the NBA. obviously you look at the actual players of the NBA versus the NHL. The NHL is a very white sport. Boston is a very white city, and like I'm not going to sugarcoat that. That's just facts. And so it was interesting transitioning from a league and a city that really put such an emphasis on diversity, and then moving into a space like the NHL and Boston, which is, it's a lot of white men. So I think I saw in my couple of years working with the Bruins the work that they were doing to try to make sure everyone felt super welcomed and included. The NHL has an initiative called Hockey is for Everyone, and it's a great initiative to just try to get everybody of all ages and genders and ethnicities into hockey. And the Bruins do a phenomenal job of making it really accessible for lower income families as well. Because obviously hockey is a super expensive sport. So making it accessible for, people that otherwise maybe couldn't afford it. I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here, but it really was a big difference in just how both the leagues and the cities operate their teams. So it was a bit of a culture shock, but I feel like I learned so much in the NBA that I could bring to the NHL and bring to the Bruins, and I'm really proud of the work I did in the 2.5 years I was with the Bruins.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of touched on it there, but you started out as a corporate communications coordinator, and progressed through 4 different titles to director of corporate communications. So obviously that's super impressive. So how were you able to continue to grow and continuously climb that ladder? And do you feel like there was maybe something that you did that was able to separate you from other people kind of vying for those roles, or just that let you continue keep growing?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's a combination of hard work and timing. And I think that so much of getting, even your foot in the door in sports is a combination of hard work and timing, because the right role needs to open up for your skills and the right city and all of that. But I think so. When I started with the Blazers, I was a 30-hour week corporate communications coordinator. I actually had 4 jobs at the time. I was coaching hockey for a girls program on the weekends, and I was selling raffle tickets at Portland Winterhawks games. I was also on the Winterhawks ice crew, so I was out there with a shovel. It was a lot of fun, actually. And I just basically said yes to every opportunity I got in the Blazers organization. If someone was like, "Oh, I need help sorting shirts for this event," and I'm like, "Okay," and I'd go, into the bowels of Moda Center and spend hours folding shirts. And then there were also a lot of opportunities to say yes to projects that are like a little bit outside of my, day to day. And so I just said yes to as many things as I could. Tried to build relationships, and um, I had a lot of opportunities though to step up and prove myself. And sometimes that's not the case, because the reality is a lot of people want to work in sports, and when they get those roles, they don't necessarily leave them. And so it can be very, very hard to climb the ladder, if you will. And I got a little bit lucky, and my first manager transitioned from communications to social media and is still the head of social media for the Blazers now. And so I got to, move up a level, and then we had some more shifting. We ended up combining our corporate communications and basketball communications into one big department at one point. And so all of these different opportunities kind of allowed me to prove myself, and then the right role would open up, and I would be the no-brainer person to fill those roles because of the hard work that I did. So, I'm very thankful for the opportunities I've had, and I pat myself on the back just a little bit for working hard too.
You should. Yeah, and I think you definitely should, because like there's one thing to say, oh yeah, it was a lot of timing, but like you said, inserting yourself into these positions to make yourself top of mind when those opportunities do come up is something that isn't just luck, or isn't just kind of, yeah, like luck of the draw. You were top of mind because of you were willing to say yes to all these things that maybe some other people wouldn't have said yes to. So I think that speaks volumes for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Got to be good to be lucky, and lucky to be good. They go hand in hand.
Hey, I like that.
And this one is a little bit of a different question, Hilary, but you kind of touched on it there, how over your time with the Trailblazers, some people transition to other departments, other teams. How much kind of over your tenure with the Trailblazers, with the Bruins, did you see that kind of interdepartmental transfer or shift or transition? And coming out of communications, is there an area or role or kind of specialty area that translates really well for people with communications degrees and experience to shift into other areas of the sports teams or businesses?
That's a great question. There was definitely a little bit of people jumping from department to department. I can think of, like, in my time with the Trailblazers, maybe 3 or 4 people in my time there that switched departments, but they were all kind of within similar-ish realms. So I would say um, like marketing / corporate partnership activation, which is, like putting on cool events that are sponsored by our corporate partners, that sort of thing. And then like the in-arena game entertainment, marketing communications. I feel like people kind of bounced around those types of roles a bit. I didn't see a whole lot of people going from like sales roles to, let's say, like basketball communications roles. One of the questions I get asked a lot, and I hope I'm not getting ahead of myself here, is like, what's the best way to get your foot in the door? And when I was starting in the industry, a lot of people told me, like, get a job in sales, because there are so many. I mentioned that it's a business at the end of the day, so they're trying to sell tickets, and there's a lot of salespeople. It's an incredibly important job. It's an incredibly hard job. The thing is, I feel like you pigeonhole yourself a little bit. So if you have an open role on the communications team and you have 2 candidates, one's an internal sales candidate for the past 5 years, has been working in sales. And then you have someone for the past 5 years who have been honing in on their communications experiences in, agencies or just another industry. Who's going to be the better candidate for the role? Obviously, there are other factors that play in, but the person that's actually getting the experience for, the role that they want to be in is the one that's going to stand out. And of course, there's an institutional knowledge that comes with being with an organization for a long time. But I feel like you should have like some sort of idea of the department you want to get into, and then just like learn about the departments that are kind of adjacent to it. But if you want to work, like I said, in like on the basketball side, let's say, working in sales for the same team isn't necessarily going to get you closer to that.
No, I think that's super valuable insight. And I think a lot of times, like you said, people do kind of feel pigeonholed or otherwise. And I had a conversation on the last episode actually about people kind of feeling that way with their degree. Like, oh, I studied business. Why would I get into engineering or data analytics for the team? And it's like, don't worry about your degree or anything like that. Like you said, kind of find those areas that you can bounce those transferable skills and pick up those different things. And there's definitely ways to do it, which I think it's helpful that you have that kind of hands-on experience and have seen people do it. But Lucas, want to take us backwards a little bit there through Hilary's journey?
Yeah, for sure. So as we know, obviously communications isn't necessarily just a sports specific part of business. And I'm curious at what point that you wanted to know that you wanted to work within sports. Was it when you were studying communications and playing hockey in school? Or was it when you worked in some other industries, got some experience and realized maybe you wanted to go into sports? Or was it a lifelong dream that you just kind of always knew?
Yeah, so I mentioned I grew up in New Hampshire in the woods, and we did not have professional sports teams within hours. And growing up, I didn't really watch. I played like every sport ever, but I did not really watch sports because there was no team close by, and so I didn't really understand like the business of professional sports until I got to college. I went to the University of Colorado in Boulder, studied communications. And when I declared my major, as many people do when they declare communications as a major, they're like, what do you do with this? I feel like colleges, not to date myself, but, back in my day, I feel like communications programs were so vague. And I feel like now colleges are doing a better job of having you pick like a specialty, whether it be like internal communications, external communications, crisis communications, like having a little bit more of a focus, which I think is helpful. But I just did communication. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. My junior year of college, I took a public relations class. And at the end of the semester, there was a project where you teamed up in groups of 3 and you had to pick a local business to actually physically go meet with them and come up with kind of a fake PR project for that business. And I picked the Colorado Avalanche, the NHL team in Denver. And I got to go to, at the time, Pepsi Center, now Ball Arena, and meet with the communications team with the Avs. And I had a conversation with someone there and I was like, this is a job. Like, this is something that you can do for a living. So, I did that project and everything just clicked for me. I was like, I love to write. I love sports. I feel like I'm a good communicator. And it was that moment that I was like, this is what I want to do. So that was my junior year of college. And then, right around the time I was graduating, I applied to like 6 or 7 jobs in the NHL, all of them completely out of my league. Like, in hindsight, like I was applying to like director level roles with no experience. And I was like, I'm going to get a job in sports because like I'm smart and I played sports and I was a little delulu. So I ended up getting a job with a PR agency that worked with consumer electronics companies. Actually, just to rewind a tiny bit, sorry, this is kind of long-winded, but so when I had applied to those jobs in the NHL my senior year of college, I wrote on my Facebook, again, dating myself, applied to 6 jobs in the NHL, fingers crossed. And I specifically said that there were jobs in PR and communications. And someone from my high school who I hadn't talked to for a very, very long time reached out to me on Facebook and was like, hey, I didn't know you worked in PR. I do too. I work for an agency. When we have an opening, do you want me to throw your resume in the mix? And I was like, okay, sure. And that's actually how I ended up with my first job, was posting on Facebook about applying to PR jobs in the NHL. Ended up getting this job that I interviewed for in New York City with every intention of going back east. And then they offered me a job in their Portland, Oregon office. I'd never been to Oregon, wanted to be closer to family, didn't happen. So sight unseen, I moved to 3,000 miles to Oregon and started this job with this PR agency in the consumer electronics space. That job was not for me. I learned that agency work is hard. So kudos to everyone out there that works for small agencies, because there's no hiding, which is tough. And also, pitching products that no one cares about is not fun. And when you're pitching sports and David Pasternak, wants to do an interview with everyone's going to get excited about that. But I will say I learned all of the basic skills of how to be a PR professional through that job: how to write a good press release, how to write a good pitch, how to manage a media list, how to get a really good placement in a magazine or a newspaper. I really feel like that those skills are what ended up getting me the job with the Trailblazers ultimately. But yeah, so it was kind of a weird path, and I had a couple more jobs between my time with the agency and ultimately getting the job with the Trailblazers. So
that's very cool. I think everybody's path is different, so it's always kind of cool to hear the different bouncing points and different pathways through it there. I think kudos to you for being willing to move for a job. So many times, conversations I'm having these days, people are saying, I want to work for the Leafs. I want to work for the Rangers. So does everybody else. Sometimes you got to go to that remote major junior team or a different agency or whatever. I think kudos to you there. But I did want to touch on as well, Hilary, kind of your experience working in both the NHL and the NBA as a woman. We talked a little bit about it off air. There's less women in sports. Thankfully, that number is increasing. Thankfully, there's more women's professional sports leagues today, we are seeing a lot better kind of hiring rates of women in traditionally male industries or roles there. All positive news, but want to talk a little bit about your experience, kind of how you navigated things, how you got your foot in the door there, and your experience overall as a woman in sports.
Yeah, thank you for asking, Nick, because it's a topic that's important to me. Dating back to when I started playing hockey, when I was in sixth grade, there was only one girls' hockey team in all of like the whole area I grew up in, and so I was, what 12, 11 years old playing on a U19 girls team with a bunch of 17, 18, 19 year olds because there were no programs. And now girls hockey is so popular that we have the PWHL, which is incredible. So when I started working for the Trailblazers, I was the only woman on the communications team, both basketball and corporate communications. And on top of that, one of my first games, this was in 2016, something like that. One of my first games, I'm sitting in the media room pregame, which is, where like usually the media and coaches and that all of them eat dinner and chat before the game and get all their stuff, together before the game. And I looked around and there were maybe like 75 people in there. I was the only woman in that room. And I was brand new. So I was 24 years old. And I was like, wow, this is intimidating. And I honestly, I don't have a lot of imposter syndrome. I'm really lucky about that. But in that moment, I was like, what am I doing here? And that moment sticks out to me in a big way, because by the end of my time with the Trailblazers, almost 7 years later, I would say at least a quarter of the room were women. Awesome. And that goes for, internal Trailblazers people and for like the media, the local media. So to see that many women, in the span of 6.5, 7 years, in that space was really exciting, because I do think a lot of women have been hired on the business side, but I also am seeing more and more women being hired on the sports side. You have female coaches in the NHL now. You have assistant coaches in the NBA as well. And you have trainers and massage therapists and mental health professionals that are women on the sports side working with the athletes. And that's super, super exciting to see.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's always great to hear your perspective as someone who has kind of been in that side of things, because, like you said, to see the change from when you initially started with the Trailblazers to at the end, it's just a sign of kind of where the industry of sports is going and heading in the right direction. And I feel like we're going to continue to see that over the next couple of years, which is very exciting. So
yeah, can I add one more thing too, specifically?
For sure.
Bruins related. So one of the things that I thought was really cool about my role is that I got to be in a lot of rooms with the highest level people in the organization who are all men. And so, I'm in the room with, the CEO, owner, the GM, the president of TD Garden, and the VP of communications, who are all men. And so I'm sitting in these spaces and, we're preparing for press conferences or media availabilities or working through a bit of a crisis situation. And I really feel like my voice was heard in those rooms as someone with a little bit of a different, diverse opinion on things. I think, honestly, they respected both my time with the Trailblazers and being in the NBA and bringing a different perspective to the room in that way, as well as being a woman, as well as being a woman who personally played hockey and has been in sports. And so I feel like I brought a lot of different perspective to those rooms with the highest level people in the organization. And that was really special for me to feel like I was heard and got to be in those spaces.
Yeah, and I think that says a lot too, right? Because it's one thing to be in the room and it's another to feel like you're valued in the room in a sense. So, no, that's a great point. And I guess just to wrap things up, we usually ask for some career advice. So what's the best piece of career advice that you've gotten that you could pass along to others, either currently in the industry or maybe looking to break into the industry?
Love this question. I would say my biggest regret trying to get into the industry is I really didn't network. I didn't do any networking. And I got so lucky that I got the job with the Trailblazers. I mean, again, a little bit of hard work too, for sure. But I just like so many people break in because of like knowing somebody, or even just the, reaching out to someone on LinkedIn and saying, "Hi, my name is so and so, and I'm interested in sports. Would you give me 10 minutes of your time to answer some questions?" I always say yes to those. If people ever want to talk to me, I'm always down to do that, as I love making connections and helping people. And my biggest piece of advice in those moments is be prepared with questions to ask the person you're reaching out to. I've had a lot of people reach out to me for my time, and I say yes. And then we get on a Zoom and they're like, "So do you have a job for me?" And I'm like, "Well, first of all, no. Second of all, I know nothing about you." And I would get very frustrated because time is very valuable. And I, was very incredibly busy in my roles, and would get frustrated. But the people that would come on and have a list of really specific questions, researched my background, and asked things that were just really intelligent, helpful questions. I love that. And then those are the people that I remember and want to reach out to when I have an open role on my team. So I would say networking is it's frustrating. As a social introvert myself, it can be very intimidating to just kind of reach out to people. But I feel like that's a really good way of making yourself stick out, among others. So I would say that's my biggest piece of advice, something that I didn't do and I wish I had.
Yeah, that's great advice, and completely agree with when you're reaching out. Be pointed, be specific. Like you said, I try to say yes to them all. Lucas tries to say yes to them all. But if you just ask for time, I probably have to say no because I don't have a lot of time. But if you say, "Can we chat about X, Y, Z?" 100%. I'm there, you're there, and honestly, from my experience, and it sounds like yours, most people in the industry are there, right, Hilary? Like, people are willing to help. People know how hard it is to get into sports. Once they're in those positions, they're not looking at people as, "Oh, they're attacking, they're coming for my job." They're looking to help people. And frankly, I think most people will get back to you if you send a polite, detailed, specific message, right?
100%. Yeah. I'm glad that you guys both say yes to those two. That's awesome, because I feel like we can just help people at least to get an understanding of what it's like to work in sports, and try to get people that first opportunity, because it can be
Absolutely.
hard. It's hard
It
out there.
sure can. It sure
Yeah.
can. But on behalf of Lucas and I, very much appreciate your time here today, Hilary. Where can people find you if they have questions? Where can they reach out about, communications, working in sports as a woman, or anything else? Maybe New Hampshire, Portland, wherever or oriented.
Yeah, you can totally reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm Hilary Gorlin. And that's probably the best place. I'm on Instagram. My account is private, but you can still DM me if you'd like, H Gorlin. And I always get back to people quickly and would love to have conversations with anyone that wants to chat.
Awesome. Well, this has been a blast. Can't thank you enough for the time here, Hilary. Guys, this has been another episode of the Working in Hockey podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for having me.